Hey guys, tonight we slip into something a little ancient. You're not in your bed anymore. Nope, you're standing on a windswept hilltop in southeastern Sweden, boots sinking into damp moss. The fog hugs the earth like a sleepy beast, and somewhere nearby, a raven cackles like it knows a secret. A team of archaeologists crouches around a shallow trench, brushing away centuries of soil, their breath clouding in the chill air. You lean closer, curiosity tugging at your sleeve. There's something down their long, dark metal. A sword. And not just any sword. This one hasn't seen daylight in over 1,000 years. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're unwinding with me tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your knees crack as you crouch beside the excavation. The sword, half revealed in the earth, has a hilt like a melted cross. Its iron blade is corroded, of course, but the shape is unmistakable, long, broad, made for someone who didn't hesitate to get up close and personal. This grave, located in the Viking town of Birka, has been known for over a century, but right now, you're watching it through fresh eyes. The team is using new tools: ground-penetrating radar, digital photogrammetry, and that oddly satisfying miniature vacuum that sucks up centuries of dust. You lean over as one archaeologist gently shifts a flat stone. Underneath, a second blade, smaller, possibly a C, kind of like a Viking backup knife. One sword wasn't enough. You squint. There's also a spearhead, peeking out like a warning fang. What's buried here clearly mattered. A lot. You take a moment just staring. The tools laid beside the body in a Viking grave weren't decorations, they were symbols. Markers of status, duty, and identity. And they weren't handed out like party favors. If someone went to their long sleep with 2 weapons, well, they probably weren't knitting socks in their spare time. And here's the first twist in tonight's tale. This grave, officially known as BJ.581, was actually found back in the late 1800s. But back then, archaeological method was more poke and grab than careful documentation. Still, even in those early notes, the discovery stunned researchers. A warrior's grave, fully kitted, with war horses, yes, plural, buried nearby like loyal Sedekeks ready to ride into the afterlife. There's a lingering smell of damp earth and pine sap. You hear the rustle of a notebook as a team member reads aloud from the old dig reports. Grave contents included not just weapons, but also just shields, a quiver of arrows, and a gaming board with counters, something like Viking chess. You tilt your head. Gaming pieces in a warrior's tomb. Archaeologists whisper theories over coffee about what it all means. Was this person a military leader? A tactician? A war gamer before it was cool? Mainstream historians confirm that such elaborate weapon burials were rare, especially in Birka, a cosmopolitan trading town where many graves are modest. This tomb, it's practically shouting, this one mattered. But even now, the grave keeps secrets. One archaeologist notices the arrangement of bones, neatly posed, arms at the sides, legs straight. No signs of injury on the remains. No signs of grave robbery either. Everything is right where it should be. The body had been honored. You shift slightly, brushing your hand across a stone with faint carvings, possibly once painted, now just ghost lines against granite. And you wonder, who is this? What did they look like? Riding across the Baltic, sword at their hip, wind snarling through fur-lined cloaks. The funny thing is, the team at the time assumed they knew. A grave filled with weapons. Must be a man. Case closed. Move on. Except, not quite. Fast forward a few decades. The soil may have settled, but the debate hadn't. Enter 21st century science, stage left, carrying tiny tweezers and a whole lot of attitude. A team decides to reanalyze the bones using modern techniques. They carefully extract a sample for DNA testing, kind of like CSI, Valhalla edition. And that's when the story veers wildly off course. But not yet. For now, you're just here, kneeling beside the open grave. The sword lies silent. The spear's tip reflects a flicker of torchlight. The air smells like history and cold iron. You glance at the gaming pieces again, round, bone-carved, some lightly stained. They were laid out in a little pouch beside the warrior's hip. Maybe they liked to play after battle. Maybe they planned strategies between raids. Or maybe, just maybe, they were someone who won wars without lifting a sword at all. Historians still argue whether Viking battlefields were mostly brute strength or cunning. If war was a game, maybe this person played it like a grandmaster. Your feet are starting to tingle in the cold, but you can't look away. This grave forgotten, re-excavated, debated has started to whisper. And what it says will flip everything you think you know about Viking warriors. But for now, hush. Let the grave speak. The sword rests beside its owner like a sleeping dog. The spear, still dangerous, even in death. Somewhere in the darkness, a raven calls again, maybe laughing. You blink against a sudden shaft of morning light, and the scene changes, not the grave itself, but what's hovering over it. Now you're peering at skeletal remains laid out in a modern lab. The bones clean, sorted, catalogued. Someone has gently placed them in the anatomical position, each piece resting on a sterile tray. The skull is narrow, the cheekbones fine, the pelvis broad. Instinct tugs at you. Wait a second. The DNA test results arrive with all the quiet drama of an male subject line reading, results attached. But what they say explodes like a war horn in a quiet fjord. This Viking warrior was biologically female. You blink again. Yep. The chromosomes check out to X. No, why not a statistical anomaly, not a lab error? The bones were cross-checked twice. Histology confirms it. And just like that, the old assumptions warrior grave equals male go tumbling like dominoes made of Viking ego. You sit back in stunned silence. This person, buried with two swords, a spear, a battle knife, and 2 war horses, wasn't a dude. And suddenly, this isn't just a grave, it's a cultural lightning bolt. Because now the story gets thorny. Was she really a warrior? Or did someone just throw a bunch of weapons in for show? The debate cracks open like a frozen lake under too much weight. Some historians say she couldn't have really fought. Maybe she was just symbolically buried with weapons. Others fire back, okay, but if this was a man with the exact same grave goods, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. And you're just trying to catch your breath, imagining her riding into battle, armor clinking, braids flying, or maybe sitting cross-legged by firelight, moving carved pieces across a gaming board while planning a dawn raid. Not a myth, not a shield maiden of legend, a real person, right there in the dirt. Mainstream fact check. Yes, Viking sagas mention female warriors, shield maidens like Lagertha, Brynhild, and Hervor. But scholars have long treated them as fantasy or rare exceptions. Now, BJ 581 throws a spiked helmet into that campfire. Still, not everyone is ready to rewrite the history books just yet. Historians still argue whether this burial proves women fought as equals or whether it's the outlier that proves the rule. One fringe theory even suggests the bones might belong to a trans person, or someone of third gender status in Viking culture because, let's face it, medieval gender roles weren't always as binary as modern minds like to think. You let that hang in the air for a second, like mist over a cold lake. Back in the lab, the bones whisper stories. Her spine shows compression, the kind you might get from years on horseback. The arm bones hint at muscle development, though not as pronounced as you'd expect from a lifelong axe wielder. Some point to that as proof she wasn't a warrior. But then again, if she were a strategist, someone who directed troops rather than swung a blade, that would still warrant the honor of those weapons. And remember those game pieces, the ones nestled beside her hip like sacred tools. Turns out they may be the biggest clue. In Viking society, the ability to plan, to lead, to outthink was as powerful as muscle. The presence of a full tactical board suggests she wasn't just a soldier. She may have been a commander. You picture her now, seated in a smoky hall, game pieces clicking against the wooden board, while younger warriors cluster nearby, eager to see her next move. And then just maybe those same warriors riding into real battle under her command. A quirky side note: Vikings believed that a worthy warrior could fight alongside Odin in the afterlife, but only if they died in combat. So, burying someone with war gear wasn't just respect. It was a passport. The gear didn't just say who she was. It said where she was going. You shift again, this time in your mind's eye, to the grave site. You now understand it differently. You look at the horse bones with fresh eyes. Not just transport animals, but noble beasts, part of her martial identity. Maybe she named them. Maybe they followed her commands like extensions of her will. And those weapons? They weren't trophies, they were companions. The way some people name their guitars or their cars, she may have known each by weight, by feel, by balance. But here's the strangest part of all. When this discovery hit the public, it wasn't just academics who argued. Entire social media debates erupted, people furious that their mental image of a bearded, bellowing Viking brute might need adjusting. It's funny, isn't it? This woman's bones lay silent for 1,000 years, but now they're shouting louder than ever. You look again at the skull. No teeth missing, no obvious blade marks. She may not have died violently, or maybe she was just that good. Still, the absence of trauma doesn't mean absence of violence. Viking warfare wasn't constant. It was seasonal. Campaigns often lasted a few weeks or months with long stretches of quiet in between. Just because she didn't die by the sword doesn't mean she didn't live by it. You wonder what her voice sounded like. Was it low and commanding? Was her laugh rare but terrifying? Did she sing? Could she have led war chants? One corner of the lab has a display case of grave reconstructions digital renderings. Based on the skeletal proportions, you spot hers among them, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a wool tunic dyed with madder root deep red. Her cloak is held by a silver brooch at her hip. That long sword curved gently with time. You step closer, squinting at her expression. She's not smiling, but somehow that feels right. You're still in the lab, but now your focus shifts from bone to object. The warrior is silent, her story written in iron and antler and fabric long decayed. You lean closer to the trademarked artifacts, BJ.581. Inside lies a carefully arranged collection of gear, each piece more curious than the last. First, the weapons. The long sword, yes, the spear, the small knife. But now you notice how intentionally everything is placed. Not thrown in, but aligned. Ritualistic. One shield at her feet, the other beside her. Some scholars call this combat-ready position, as if she might leap up at any moment and charge off into Valhalla. You reach for the gaming set. The pieces made of antler and whalebone fit in the palm like smooth, forgotten secrets. A few are dyed red with iron oxide. Not just a game. Then maybe a symbolic battle, a model for real-world strategy. Think of it as the Viking version of a chessboard, except instead of pawns, the losers probably lost actual limbs. Here's the fringe detail that really catches your breath. One of the pieces, just one, is shaped differently. Not a flat disc, but a tiny animal, a horse. Some think it marked the king piece, others think it's a charm. There's no consensus. Historians still argue whether it meant leadership or loyalty. A small leather pouch once lay next to the game board. The leather's gone, but residue remains, fibers and faint traces of what? Some say it may have held herbs, others suggest pigments or charms. One test even found traces of bee pollen. Maybe she carried honey-dipped herbs. Maybe she chewed something to steel her nerves before battle, or maybe she just liked snacks. Either way, the pouch is now its own little enigma. As you dig deeper, figuratively and literally, you start to notice the subtle luxury threaded through the grave. One buckle has silver inlay. A comb made of reindeer antlers shows careful carving. A brooch, too delicate for war, suggests ceremony. This wasn't just a fighter. This was someone who balanced blade and beauty. You glance at a textile remnant, wool, woven tight, dyed with madder. Red again, the color of blood, sure, but also wealth. Dyes were expensive, time-consuming. You didn't wear red unless you meant to make an impression. There's a faint scent of cedar from the display wood, but you let your mind wander back to the gravesite. What did this look like the day she was buried? A line of mourners, maybe. Warriors placing weapons beside her. A ritual. Perhaps they sang. Perhaps they wept. Or maybe they stood silently, while a skald whispered a poem to guide her soul westward, to where fallen warriors feast forever. You spot a bronze ring near her left hand. Worn smooth. No inscription. Some say it was a lover's gift. Others think it might have symbolized allegiance, sworn loyalty to a jarl or king. Or maybe it was just hers, a trinket, a memory. One piece of a life you'll never fully recover. And then there's the animal bones. Yes, the horse is one on each side of her grave, but also bones from a small dog. Tiny. A lapdog, maybe? Not the kind of beast you'd take raiding, that's for sure. Maybe it followed her everywhere, slept at her feet. Maybe it jumped into the grave, or was placed there, curled up as if still waiting. Quirky side detail. In Viking mythology, dogs often guide souls to the afterlife, like fuzzy Deathhuber. So burying her with a dog might have been both personal and spiritual. You step back, taking in the totality, weapons, animals, artifacts. The calm skeleton at the center of it all. This was no anonymous burial. This was a carefully curated display of identity. And here's a twist: archaeologists have found other Viking graves with similar objects, but the full combination seen here, it's one of a kind. Which leads you to a modern question with ancient echoes. Why was she honored like this? Some say it's because she led warriors. Others think she might have been a priestess of sorts, someone who blended martial strength with ritual power. In Norse tradition, the line between the sword and the sacred was often thin. You could swing a blade and cast a charm in the same breath. One speculative theory goes even further, that she was a veiled seeress trained in prophecy and battle magic. And while most Velvas weren't buried with weapons, who's to say this one didn't write her own rules? Historians still argue whether roles like that were ever meant for warriors, or whether this grave is evidence of someone who's straddled many worlds. Leader, fighter, mystic, tactician. You glance again at the gaming board. Picture her alone in her hall, the flickering fire casting long shadows. She sits with her pieces, plotting, planning, waiting, not for war, necessarily, but for something. The only thing she wasn't buried with, a name. And that, somehow, makes all of this more haunting. This elaborate grave for someone who mattered so deeply, and yet no runestone, no inscription, no saga tells her tale. She vanished from memory, until the day someone with a brush and a notebook uncovered her bones. You tilt your head. Maybe that's why she was buried this way. Maybe the people of Burka knew her name didn't need carving, because her legend would survive in whispers, in iron, in bone. The lab grows quiet again. You linger for a moment longer. The shield, the sword, the tiny carved horse all seem to hum in your ears, as if trying to speak through centuries of silence. And you realize, she didn't just take her weapons to the grave, she became one. You step out of the lab and into the firestorm. Not literal flames, this is academia. After all, but the heat radiates from published rebuttals, conference debates, and yes, comment sections. The DNA report from BJ.581 doesn't sit quietly. In a museum, it lobs a grenade into the long-held image of the Viking warrior, towering, bearded, male, and suddenly everyone's got an opinion. You pull up a virtual chair at a history conference where half the panelists wear tweed and the other half wear expressions of disbelief. Some scoff. This proves nothing. It's one grave. Others lean in with barely contained glee. It's one grave, one that rewrites the rules. Because here's the thing. This wasn't a foot soldier. This was elite. This was officer. Class. And now we know she had 20 chromosomes. Cue the plot twist. A few researchers float an alternative theory, scrambling to fit the square peg into a long-held round hole. Maybe the weapons were ceremonial. Maybe they were meant to honor a male relative. Maybe she was just buried like a warrior, not as one. But you've been to the grave. You've seen the layout. You've touched the carved game pieces. You know better. Still, the resistance isn't entirely surprising. Gender roles in Viking society weren't just historical, they'd been romanticized, idealized, folded into everything from metal music to Hollywood. Changing the narrative means upsetting not just scholars, but fanboys with rune tattoos and replica axes mounted on their bedroom walls. And yet, the evidence stands. A fringe group of scholars take it even further. They suggest BJ.581 might represent someone outside the male-female binary. After all, Norse myth itself makes space for shapeshifters and gender-fluid deities. Loki, for instance, once turned into a mare and gave birth to an 8-legged horse. So maybe the Vikings weren't as rigid about gender as we assume. Historians still argue whether Norse society allowed for women or others to hold military command. Written sources from the time are sparse, contradictory, and often tangled with myth. Some point to the Hervar saga, where a woman named Hervar wields a cursed sword and commands ships. Others wave that off as poetic fantasy. But this grave, this is no poem. You wander now through the halls of a museum in Stockholm, where a full reconstruction of the burial is on display. There she is laid out in a glass case. One shield at her feet, one beside her. The bones are real, the weapons replicas. Still, the effect is staggering. Visitors linger longer here than almost anywhere else. You watch them. Some lean in with reverence. Others scoff, arms crossed tight. A few whisper maybe to their kids, maybe to themselves. Your own reflection hovers beside the case. You glance at it and realize you're not looking at her anymore. You're looking at yourself, wondering what stories you've believed just because they were easier. She didn't fight that way. Modern researchers try to classify her, pin her down like a butterfly to a velvet board. Was she a commander? A priestess? A political leader? A warrior queen? The titles feel heavy. None quite fit. But what's clear is this: whoever she was, she commanded respect. Enough that her community buried her not with dishes and domestic tools but with instruments of war. Let's rewind a second. Remember those horses, too, flanking her remains. That alone is monumental in Viking culture. Horses weren't just transportation. They were status, power, sometimes spiritual messengers. They were rarely buried with women. In fact, the pairing of horses and weapons is one of the clearest signs of martial identity in Norse graves. And she had to. Even in male warrior burials, this is rare. It screams importance. You step into her boots for a moment, leather creaking, the weight of the sword on your hip, cold air in your lungs as you stand atop a ridge, looking down at your war band. Maybe some of them doubted you at first. Maybe. Some still do, but then you give the signal and they follow. Because real leadership doesn't care what's under your tunic. Now. Zoom out from the museum. You're standing in the middle of a larger cultural reckoning. Textbooks will need edits. Documentaries will need caveats. Those little plastic Viking toys at gift shops, well, they'll probably still have beards. But the seed has been planted. The Viking Age, it turns out, wasn't one uniform story. It was a saga, full of side quests. You think about all the other graves still untouched. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. How many warriors, strategists, seers, and outcasts are buried beneath unmarked mounds? Their stories still sleeping, and how many of them aren't who we assumed? You brush your fingers across the museum glass, cool to the touch. Behind it, her bones are still, but her legacy, that's a different story. She didn't rise from her grave. She didn't need to. She just waited for us to catch up. You're walking now slowly, thoughtfully along a grassy ridge where wind snakes through tall heather. Beneath your feet, soil that has hidden secrets for over a millennium. Ahead of you, a low hill dotted with ancient grave markers. This is Burka, not the touristy version, no snack bars or souvenir stands. Just quiet earth and time-carved stone standing like sentries. The grave of BJ, 581, lies not far from here, still cold honored. But tonight, you're not looking down into the burial pit. You're looking around at the legacy. Because this grave didn't just stir up historians and DNA labs, it challenged how we imagine the past. It reminded us that the Viking Age wasn't all axes and testosterone. It was layered, complicated, and sometimes, when we're lucky, surprisingly inclusive. Let's get real. This warrior wasn't a one-woman revolution, but she was a missing piece. One that made the whole picture clearer and less comfortable. She proved something we often forget, that the past is just as messy, just as nuanced as the present. We just happen to have worse documentation. You pause beside another grave. Unmarked, overgrown. Could this one hold another surprise? Another tactician, another game-playing, horse-owning, sword-wielding legend whose bones have stories to tell. Historians today comb through Viking grave records with fresh eyes. Hundreds of burials once assumed male based on grave goods alone are being reevaluated. Because, as BJ.581 taught us, warriors didn't come with gender labels. They came with grit, and maybe a few well-placed swords. Some researchers are calling for a complete overhaul of how we interpret Viking burial sites. Others resist. Change is slow, especially when it means rewriting sagas. But the conversations are happening, and those conversations ripple outward, into classrooms, into films, into bedtime stories, and into your imagination. Right now, you think again of the warrior, her bones laid out neatly, her sword by her side, her horses flanking her like a living honor guard. You imagine the last look she gave the world before the dirt closed in. Was she satisfied? Defiant? Did she believe her story would live on? Probably not. Most people don't. But she got lucky. Or maybe, just maybe, we did. There's a curious modern ripple effect too. More young people are diving into Viking history than ever before. Not just boys sketching longships and notebooks, but girls and non-binary kids too. Suddenly seeing themselves in horned helmets, even if, yes, those were mostly a 19th century costume invention. One quirky detail you overhear from a museum guide. After the BJ 581 discovery went public, replica sales of female Viking armor spiked online. Some folks finally got tired of chainmail bikinis and said, you know what? Give me the full plate and war horses, thanks. There's even talk of naming streets or parks after the BJ.581 warrior, though. As usual, the debate now is what to call her. No name was left behind. No runestone, just the bones. Some call her the Burka warrior. Others try to give her a Norse name, Freydis, perhaps, or Inga, or Sigrid. But maybe she wouldn't want that. Maybe she'd want us to stop naming and start listening. Because the truth is, she wasn't just a woman in a warrior's grave. She was a warrior. Full stop. And now that we've found her, we have to carry her story forward. Like a torch, like a sword, like a whisper against the night wind. You sit now on a stone beside the hill. The sky's gone navy blue, the stars pricking through like tiny gods blinking awake. The air is still, crisp, not unlike the night she may have passed, whether in battle or sleep or ceremony, we'll never know. What we do know is that she mattered, and that she still does. She's no longer just a set of bones in a glass case. She's a chapter reopened, a saga revised, a mystery we can't stop rereading. You lean back. Let your thoughts drift. You can still hear the soft jingle of harnesses, the creak of leather armor, the faint clack of a game piece dropped onto a board. The past isn't gone. It's just waiting to be uncovered. And now, the grave fades. The museum grows quiet. The soil settles. Everything slows. Let your breath soften. In and out. You're no longer standing on a Swedish hillside or peering through glass at a silent warrior. You're just here, warm, safe, tucked in beneath your own blankets. But something lingers, doesn't it? That feeling that maybe history isn't as far away as we think. That maybe, somewhere under layers of dust and time, there are still truths waiting to rise. You picture the warrior again, not as bones, not even as a reconstructed figure, but as a spark, a flicker of fire in the dark. Someone who stepped far beyond the role she was expected to play. Someone who made them bury her with 2 horses and a full armory. Because how else do you honor someone who defied the script? Sleep's calling now. The swords are laid to rest. The game board's packed away. The horses drift quietly in their dreamless fields. You're not here to fight tonight. You're here to rest, to let the wind of old stories pass through you. Like a lullaby sung in a forgotten tongue. So close your eyes. Let her guard your dreams. And drift into the soft hum of silence, where even warriors lay down their shields.